Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Gonna remind one more time, in the chat, I'm going to put our prompt question to start off our session, a little warm up for us. And if you could think and reflect, what does dignity mean to you? We're gonna center our conversation on this idea and collective understanding of dignity. Be really helpful if we could see some responses, any thoughts or ideas of what dignity means in your life, or what we want for our communities. Thank you so much. I see and I hope I'm not mispronouncing names, but I see Dilara. They say that dignity equals access or to needs for safety, wellness, and community. Yes, access is very critical to make sure that we all have dignity. Alex mentioned self-determination, being treated with equality and equity, no matter where we are in the class, race, gender spectrum, right? That beautiful intersectionality of our lives, making sure that we have self-determination across all of our struggles and that we're linking our struggles for self-determination. I see, beautiful. I'm so excited based on all these responses and reflections. I'm excited who's in the room today. Thank you so much for joining us. So the prompt is, what does dignity mean to you? And I see that dignity means upholding healthy values that treats others and ourselves with respect and love. Yes, love at the center, dignity allowing for folks to grow in ways that are healthy to the individual and the community, right? The individual with the collective, very beautiful. Dignity means having what you need to live a full, free, and healthy life. Thank you so much, Marisa. And I see that dignity means having access to choose how we express oneself in all ways and be respected and be seen by themselves and by others that way. It's great. Thank you so much. All these points are super valid and ground our conversation and really uplifting the humanity in all of us and the fact that all of us deserve equitable access to be able to have the things we need in our communities for self-empowerment, like it says here, so that we can mutually respect each other, right? And really trying to ensure and center our humanity across all of our communities. Thank you so much for participating in this little warm-up. We're going to pull on some of these responses throughout the presentation tonight and in our discussion at the end with the question and answers to tie this all back in beautifully together. Again, we'd like to just ask everyone to please participate. If you need translation, make sure to let us know if you need support in the chat. Si está participando en español, por favor, asegúrese que poner en el chat si ocupa apoyo, pero también hay información para interpretación abajo con un globito para poder conectarse en español. We'd like to ask everyone to please mute yourselves except for the panelists and the presenters tonight as we kick off. It's 5:36, so let's go. We'd like to welcome everyone to our event. This is Care Not Cages. My name is Juana Teresa Tello. I'm an organizer and educator based in San Francisco and a member of the Public Health Justice Collective and other grassroots organizations fighting for racial, economic, and environmental justice in the city. I'm very proud and honored to be your host tonight for this event, which is organized by the No New SF Jail Coalition. Again, just really thankful to our translator, Noemi, for providing language access. We're really excited for this informative event for you tonight with some very brilliant and brave speakers lined up, along with a life-saving mini training hosted by the Drug Overdose Prevention Education Project, also known as DOPE. And again, I encourage you to get comfy, to settle in, maybe pulling out a piece of paper and a pen so that you can take notes, because our grassroots experts will be dropping some valuable gems with knowledge, analysis, tips, resources for all of us to know and use. Again, just want to ask everyone to stay muted throughout the event, and please feel free to use the chat feature throughout the event. We'll be opening up with some slides for the first part of our session. And as you can see here, we want to just remind everyone that this event was sponsored by Lyric, by the Black Youth Project 100, the Mental Health Association of San Francisco, Poor Magazine, as well as all the member organizations of the No New Jail Coalition. The event details are here. After this introduction, we'll get grounded with some shared understanding of definitions of key words used throughout this session. Then we'll move into a short training portion led by Kristen Marshall from the DOPE Project. At about 6:15, we'll start our panel with our brief presentation from each of our speakers, followed by a discussion between the panelists. We'll close out with some Q&A from the audience, share some key takeaways, and at the end, provide announcements with ways that we can all get involved. The No New SF Jail Coalition has organized this event tonight as part of a monthly series called Abolition in Action. The coalition has been working for years in San Francisco against jailing and criminalization, but more importantly, fighting for healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. The No New SF Jails is an abolitionist coalition, meaning it works to push our city to respond to the root causes of harm and conflict without punishment, to end our city's reliance on jailing, criminalization, policing, and surveillance, all with the understanding that in order to end violence, we must ensure that all of our communities' basic needs are met and that they're treated with dignity. After the coalition successfully organized to demand City Hall pass legislation to finally shut down the dilapidated County Jail 4 at 850 Bryant this past May, it maintained pressure on the city to follow through on that decision. And since then, the coalition has been hosting monthly events on different topics related to abolition as a way to inform our communities and build up our skills in creating a city that doesn't rely on punishment of any form. Just this past week, Mayor Breed and the sheriff announced that County Jail 4 may be closed at an earlier timeline, said to be by the beginning of September. This happened just after the sheriff continued to push back on the ordinance throughout the entire summer, with the ultimate goal of continuing to use the jail past November to cage imprisoned workers. Also, it's important for us not to forget that Mayor Breed didn't support the ordinance and did not sign onto the ordinance this past spring, even with a 10-1 majority vote by the supervisors. It's clear that the pressure from grassroots power in this coalition is not just building, but it's working. To learn more about the No New SF Jail Coalition, I encourage you to visit their website at nonewsfjail.org. And you can learn more about our abolition in practice and learn more about the work of the coalition since its inception in 2013. Moving on to our definitions, before we dive into the training portion of our program tonight, we want to build some shared understanding of some of the key terms that will come up throughout the event. First off, you'll hear us mention criminalization a lot. By criminalization, we mean the process through which actions become illegal or the process through which people are made criminal. Most often we hear the word crime used to signify a wrongdoing or harm, but crime is actually a social construction, meaning what is considered a crime depends on the context, the time, place, geography, power relations, and cultural norms and values of a particular situation. Also, it's important to understand and think critically about how actions become crimes only after they have been legally and culturally defined as a crime. So we've been taught to think that crime just means bad or wrong or harm or violence, but the specific action we may be referring to may not actually be harmful or a form of violence at all. For example, the recent anti-policing protests earlier this year, the city enacted curfews to repress people's resistance, and being outside of your home past a particular time became a crime under the curfew and resulted in a number of people being arrested. It's also important for us to see that many activities deemed crimes are acts of survival that communities rely on, particularly poor, Black, and Brown communities, especially in cities like San Francisco, where the racial and economic inequity is so high. In thinking about criminalization, we want to keep in mind that not only the specific acts are criminalized, but entire groups of people and communities, and we see this in how policing targets Black, Brown, poor, and street-based people. On the other hand, decriminalization is the process of resisting and dismantling criminalization. It's important to see that when we say decriminalization, we don't just mean legalize. We can look at the struggle to legalize cannabis, for example. If we just work to legalize something, policing still is being used to control that legalization process. So while folks with more privilege, for example, are protected by the law and can enjoy cannabis where it's legalized, the policing and stigma of substance is used mostly to target, harass, and punish Black and brown users. So decriminalization is deeper than legalization. It includes confronting and challenging stigma or the use of shame or disgrace to disrupt that shame and any effort of legitimizing punishment. As a process, decriminalization speaks to a range of approaches in organizing, from work to decriminalizing gangs by resisting gang injunctions, to creating safe consumption sites or overdose protection sites where drug users can use harm reduction supplies to do certain drugs safely, and also sanctuary efforts to resist racist attacks on immigrant communities. Harm reduction is the focus of our event tonight, and we can be defined differently depending on who we're speaking to.
Hi there, the interpreters are having a really difficult time keeping up. If you could please slow your pace, it'd be great. Thanks so much.
Great, we'll start with harm reduction. Thank you for that feedback. Harm reduction is the focus of our event tonight and can be defined differently depending on who you speak to. In general, harm reduction refers to a problem-solving approach that is aimed at intentionally reducing the negative consequences associated with harmful, criminalized, stigmatized, or risky activities. Activities like substance use, sex work, abusive relationships, living on the street. Harm reduction is an approach is about engaging people where they're at, without judgment, while taking small steps to reduce the negative consequences as much as possible. That can look like substitution therapies for substance or drug use, safety plans to use drug less, often gradually, or that can look like safety plans for staying in sometimes abusive relationships in a healthy way or living on the streets. Harm reduction as an approach started in the movement for drug users' rights and to resist the war on drugs, and also has roots in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Harm reduction as an approach to lessening the negative consequences now is used in other movements and is addressing related other issues related to sex work, youth work, domestic violence advocacy, and others. Regardless of the exact approach or context, harm reduction is rooted in a belief in and a respect for the rights and dignity of all people, and uplifts care, support, and agency. Because harm reduction is all about uplifting people's dignity and agency no matter what, harm reduction actively challenges narratives that dehumanize, shame, or punish people who engage in risky behaviors, and gives people access to tools that reduce potential harm. Even though we didn't talk directly about abolition, all of the terms we just went over are directly at play in our work to build a jail-free, police-free, and self-determined city. As a central part of the prison industrial complex, or PIC, criminalization is one of the many tools that police and courts use to target both specific actions and groups of people. By making someone a criminal, it's possible for cops to snatch our people up and lock us away. So in order to build communities that do not rely on the prison industrial complex, the use of imprisonment, policing, or punishment in any form, we must fight by decriminalizing, right? The methods of survival of our people in our communities. In other words, we need to define and create true safety that does not uphold crime and instead resists criminalization. Harm reduction then is one tool we can use in problem solving, addressing harm or potential harm, and cultivating community accountability. Harm reduction is an alternative to criminalization and enables our communities to not have to rely on policing, jailing, and punishment. And right now, specifically during this COVID crisis, we need to sharpen our skills in harm reduction as we face multiple layers of public health crises, including imprisonment, police violence, mass unemployment, climate disaster, and overdose deaths. By using harm reduction approaches in our communities, we can create the systems of collective care our communities need to survive and thrive. So you're probably wondering, what does harm reduction look like in practice? And how can we use harm reduction in our work? I have the pleasure of introducing Kristen Marshall, who will move us into a training portion of our event to build up our skills in harm reduction. Kristen works with the DOPE Project, or the Drug Overdose Prevention Education Project, and is going to teach us how to identify an opioid overdose and give us options for how we can respond to an overdose without calling the police. Thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us. I'll let you take it away.
All right, can everybody hear me? Tight. Thank you so much, Juana. My name is Kristen Marshall. I manage a little program called the Drug Overdose Prevention and Education Project, or the DOPE Project. And so there's like not a lot of guesswork about what we talk about all day. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So just so folks know who we are and kind of what we do, we are a program of the National Harm Reduction Coalition, and we were founded in 2001 based on the, well, there might be, hold on one second. Robert, can you mute that? Oh, hold on. Yeah, sorry, there's two of us in the same room. Sorry about the echo. We'll turn it off in a second. So we were founded in 2001. We're actually drug user founded based on the work of young people who use drugs in the Haight and Golden Gate Park, who were distributing naloxone out of a duffel bag that they got from another person. This was before it was legalized. This was before it was like a widely known practice. And then DOPE Project is a program of the National Harm Reduction Coalition, and it is funded by the San Francisco Department of Public Health to coordinate the city's response to overdose, as well as oversees all of the community-based naloxone distribution and training for San Francisco. So what that means is, one, we are the first public health department funded naloxone distribution program in the country. And we are the largest single city community-based naloxone distribution program in the country as well. And kind of what I like to let people know is that we exist within the nonprofit industrial complex, right? So we exist in this huge system that also operates under the same system that white supremacy built, that the patriarchy built. And so I'm always really mindful to name those things, and then to name that what makes us special is that we are a team of people who use drugs and people who love people who use drugs and have varying lived experience with drug use and the war on drugs. And we are connected on the ground to people who use drugs in San Francisco, and that is the only reason we continue to function and to work in the way that we do. But because of our positioning and funding from the San Francisco Department of Public Health, it allows us to connect additionally with other city agencies, nonprofit groups, and our community at large, so that we can capture the whole picture of overdose and drug user health in San Francisco. Next slide. So just some numbers so you can see. So DOPE Project prioritizes putting naloxone, or Narcan, which is the opioid overdose reversal drug, directly into the hands of people who use drugs and their loved ones in San Francisco. We do not distribute naloxone or Narcan to police officers or EMS. We are strictly community-based, and we continue to prioritize people who are at the highest risk for overdose in San Francisco, which are people experiencing homelessness, people living in our supportive housing programs, and people living at the intersections of poverty, race, trauma, and all of the other structural violences that our communities suffer under this kind of massive criminalizing system. And in spite of all of that and everything that they experience, they are the people who use drugs and people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco are the most successful group of first responders in the city. Last year alone, in 2019, they reversed 2,610 overdoses. And just between January and June of this year, they've already reversed over 1,600 overdoses. We know that those are undercounts because those are report backs. So we distributed through our partners, our 20 partner sites, which are other nonprofit programs and community groups that serve people at risk for overdose. They distributed over 40,000 doses of injectable naloxone into the city just last year. Oh, and I see a great question, and that's going to be my next slide. So I got you. So at this point, can we go back again? There we go. And so over the course of our time in San Francisco, so since 2001, we have trained over 15,000 people in how to identify an overdose and how to respond to one with Narcan. Over 8,000 providers have been trained. So we also train people who serve people who use drugs. And so over 8,000 of them have been trained by us. 30,000 Narcan refills have been given out. So that's 30,000 times people came back for more Narcan. And since 2001, over 13,000 successful overdose reversals. And so you may have seen in the news that our overdose death numbers are going up, that are the conditions, the risk factors for people experiencing overdose have just been amplified by several things. So it includes like a very strong drug supply, but it also includes like the actual root factors and the root causes for overdose are being amplified as well, right? And so the pandemic has amplified that, but prior to even the pandemic, our strong drug supply really amplified their risk factors, which are mostly the structural violence piece. So poverty, displacement, homelessness, trauma, chaotic mental health symptoms, you know, any number of things that people are experiencing, all of those things have just been amplified. And so until the root causes of overdose are addressed, you know, those numbers will continue to rise, and our death numbers pale in comparison to our overdose reversal numbers, right? So last year, we lost about 400 San Franciscans to opioid overdose. And so if you put that number next to the reversal, even just the community reversal numbers, you'll see what's possible, right? When people have access to what they need to take care of themselves and to take care of each other. And so the next slide. So I love data. I love numbers. You know, we as a community already knew what we're capable of, right? You know, those of us coming from this community, those of us who have worked in this community, you know, we understand that people are very capable of caring for themselves as long as they have access to what they need. But looking at these numbers next to each other, I mean, just really kind of hammers it home for us. So at this point, Narcan is a thing that everyone really knows about. We kind of joke that it's really sexy to talk about Narcan right now. When we talk about opioid overdose, the overdose crisis, you know, overdose isn't new. Harm reduction isn't new. Even overdose crises are not new. They've been happening. People have been dying. People have been incarcerated for decades. The war on drugs has been happening for decades. And these strategies have been implemented by people who use drugs in their community, specifically people who use drugs and sex workers, for decades. It's only been recently when we have watched our nationwide overdose rate kind of skyrocket for a lot of different reasons. And suddenly, for the first time, we're hearing a call for more compassionate response. And it is largely because of who is dying. And so I always like to name that drug use is not specific to any one community. Basically, everyone uses drugs on some level. It's just about what drugs are they using? Is that drug supply criminalized or is unregulated? And who is using them? We know that communities of color, Black and brown people, are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. They're over-policed. They experience the most harms related to the war on drugs. And they've been dying. They've generationally, like the trauma that those communities experience for decades is very clear to us in the work that we do. And so it's important for us to stay grounded and centered in who this work is for. I don't work for the police, and I don't work for EMS, and I don't actually care that they carry naloxone. EMS should, it's their job to respond to medical emergencies, of which an overdose is. As you can see by our numbers, I'm really happy that the police happened to witness those 135 overdoses and that they knew what to do. They've been carrying Narcan for 4 years. We've been carrying Narcan for over a decade. And we view our role as kind of to stand as a city program, to stand as a barrier between police responding with Narcan and our community responding with Narcan. We prioritize our community, and we are very clear with the police that our community should be allowed to respond and they should not be interfering. And slowly but surely, they are listening because they're recognizing that we're just better at it. And so, these are our numbers just to paint that picture for you all. That SFPD reversed 135 overdoses in 2019, and EMS, responded to 2,265 overdoses. Those are exact numbers because they are documented in reports. Like I said, our number is a drastic undercount. It's probably about 20% of what is actually happening out in the community. So the 2,600 number represents about 20% of the successful community overdose reversals happening. And so that's just like a snapshot. Next. So what we kind of like to say is, people who use drugs in San Francisco prove what is possible when they have access to the resources they need to keep themselves and each other safe. If people who use drugs had not had Narcan all this time, our overdose death numbers would be in the thousands. And it is their work, largely unnoticed and unrecognized, that is the reason you are more likely to survive your overdose in San Francisco than you are to pass away from them. And the reason, and I'm sure people understand this, right? Our communities, like I said, experience disproportionate amounts of policing and punishment for the things that they have to do to survive under some pretty extreme circumstances and realities. And so by putting Narcan, by ensuring that they have access to Narcan, low barrier access so they don't have to give anything to get the Narcan, ensures that they're prepared for an emergency and that they do not have to engage with a system that is harmful to them in order to get the aid that they need. So in San Francisco, police typically do not respond to medical emergencies, even if you say overdose on the 911 call. That is the result of years of work from community activists to keep police away from medical calls. But we know that our EMS systems also perpetuate a lot of harm. And so by not having to call 911 and being able to take care of the emergency themselves, it reduces the harm that they experience at the hands of the state. And so with that, I would love to provide a very simple training to everyone. The beautiful thing about Narcan is that it is so simple and so safe, and in California, extremely legal, and I'll go over that a little bit, that you cannot do any more harm to a person when you administer Narcan to them if they are already not responsive and not breathing. The way this medication works, right? So let me back up. So drugs. Let's talk about drugs for a second. So the drug specifically that Narcan works on are opioids. Opioids are the class of medication include heroin, fentanyl, painkillers like Oxycontin, Dilaudid or hydromorphone, morphine, Vicodin, Percocet, codeine. So all of those things are opioids, and they all have the same impact on the body. It just depends on their potency and strength. And so everybody has these opioid receptors in their brain. For the most part, they're just hanging out. You take the opioid, it settles into the receptor, and you feel the effect. And all that opioids impact, right? They impact that central nervous system. They provide a little bit of distance between you and the pain that you're experiencing. And so that pain could be physical, that pain could be emotional, that pain could be any number of reasons why people experience pain, right? We know that our communities experience a lot of pain. And so opioids help them provide a little bit of distance from their pain so that they can otherwise function in the ways that they need to or know how to. And so that's how they impact the central nervous system. They also impact the respiratory system, and that's the system that impacts overdose, right? And so the respiratory system are the lungs, and all opioids do is slow that system way down. They're depressants, right? So they're slowing you down. You're seeing people that are sedated. We often say, like, you'll hear there's whole language to describe people who are on opioids. You call nodding out, falling out. People are in the nod. If you can see my video, it's usually people that are kind of slumped over like that. All that's happening is that breathing is slowing way down and people are falling asleep, because that's all that happens when you go to sleep at night. Your breathing slows down and you lose consciousness, right? An overdose, all any drug overdose is the drug overwhelming the system, right? Most of us have experienced some kind of drug overdose in our life. Maybe you drank too much alcohol one night and it ended with your head in the toilet throwing up, and then you pass out and you feel like garbage next day, right? That's technically an alcohol overdose. It's a low grade alcohol overdose. I love drinking coffee in the morning, but if I have too much of it, and the drug in coffee is caffeine, if I have too much of it, I start to feel frantic, anxious, my heart rate goes up. The thing I was trying to do, which was focus, now I can't, but I definitely reorganized my middle desk drawer like 92 times. And then I looked up and it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon and my whole day is wasted and now I have a headache, right? So not only is that a low grade stimulant overdose, because that's what caffeine is, it's just a stimulant, but that feeling, that headache, that feeling like garbage afterwards, that's withdrawal, right? So these are really common things that people experience. Again, the difference between, say, alcohol, caffeine, and fentanyl, like illicitly manufactured fentanyl, is that caffeine and alcohol are legal, they are regulated, and when I go to consume them, I actually typically consume them in safe consumption spaces, which are bars and cafes, right? So again, drug use, like what is criminalized drug use is actually just about who is using the drug, and what drug and how regulated that drug is. So for an opioid overdose, opioids overwhelm that receptor, breathing slows down to the point where they're not getting enough oxygen, or that breathing completely stops, right? Now we have an opioid overdose. But how do I know what that looks like, right? When someone is not getting enough oxygen, it will be immediately apparent that something is wrong. Their skin color will change right away. Lighter skinned folks will turn a blue-gray. Darker skinned folks will turn a more ashen gray, like the color drops out of them. Lips will tinge a blue-gray or a purple-gray, and they will be mostly unresponsive. What can also happen, and this is pretty common for opioid overdoses, is you might hear this kind of snore gurgle sound. It's irregular, and it's just the chest muscles trying to contract, and they are not able to pull in a full breath. That person's skin will be turning colors at that point, right? Regardless of if I know this person's drug use history, depending on the context that I'm responding in, I will assume an opioid overdose because it is safe to do that. Narcan or naloxone, and I'm going to show you both types we have here. We have the nasal version, right? And then we also have the injectable version. This is the muscling. You inject this into a muscle. And so all Narcan is known as an opioid antagonist, which basically means is that it's designed to pop the opioids off the receptor and block the receptor. It binds stronger to those receptors than the opioids themselves. So it literally reverses the effect of the overdose. But also if you know anything about opioids and people who are dependent on opioids, is that if you don't get your dependencies met, if you don't get those needs met, you experience the symptoms of withdrawal, just like we talked about with caffeine, right? There's that headache, it's usually like right here, you're really cranky and irritable. Opioid withdrawals, are, the way I like to describe them, if you've never experienced them yourself, and they're important to understand when it comes to administering aid during an overdose, opioid withdrawals feel like the worst flu of your life, timed by 10, while you're basically just being repeatedly hit by a train, is how I like to describe them. You're sweating profusely, your nose is running, your muscles are cramping, your bones hurt, your skin is on fire. And on top of all of that, if the reason you were using opioids to begin with has not been addressed, you are feeling all of that too. It is extremely painful. It is extremely traumatic. And because of the way Narcan works, right, it pulls those opioids off the receptor, blocks the receptor. The one side effect of Narcan is that people wake up from their overdose in full-blown withdrawals, right? But that's the only side effect, and they are temporary. Because Narcan it's that one job. So if someone is not breathing or not responsive for another reason, the Narcan just will not have an effect, right? So if you find someone who is gray, they're not responsive, you give them Narcan, and it was another thing that was going on for them, the Narcan won't hurt them, and you're administering aid, you're calling 911, and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? And that person will be okay. So all that to say is that Narcan is very safe to use. It is very easy to use. Responding to overdoses are terrifying, but this process that I'm about to describe to you is very easy and simple. And the other piece, just to reassure everyone, is that because of work by activists in California, it is very legal for you to carry, for you to administer, and for you to give away at any point. It is the set of laws that allow us to distribute Narcan as lay people, because Narcan is still a prescription medication, but we distribute it in the city under a standing order prescription. So it's very legal for you to carry and to administer. So when someone's not breathing and not responsive, you suspect an opioid overdose. The first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to try to wake this person up. Because Narcan causes those very severe withdrawals, I don't want to just haul off and like shove something up someone's nose who might just be sleeping, right? Like that's an assault. So let's not do that, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is try to get this person to respond. Even if they're not breathing, the way I think about opioid overdose is I think about a pool of water, right, with a shallow end, and most people are actually just hanging out in that shallow end. But as the overdose progresses, it goes deeper and deeper, and breathing becomes harder and harder, right? And so I want to test to see if people are in that shallow end and try to wake them up. The easiest way to wake someone up is we're going to administer some pain. Pain, in this case, just reminds the body that it's still alive. The nicest way to administer pain, because we're not trying to like haul off and punch this person in the face 42 times, like they're overdosing, they're having a bad enough day already. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a hard sternum rub. We also call it a chest noogie. And so you take your knuckles and you rack as hard as you can on the breastplate, really, really hard. Also what will work is a hard, we call it the mom pinch, which is that back of the arm fat pinch and twist as hard as you can, while also yelling and letting this person know what's going on. People do not know they're overdosing when they're overdosing, right? So they're in their warm, fluffy sleep cloud, and all of a sudden they're waking up to some jackass beating on their chest, screaming at them, right? Very traumatic. So I'm doing this, I'm trying to wake this person up, and I'm saying, hey, can you hear me? Wake up, I think you're overdosing. If you don't wake up, I'm going to Narcan you. We call that the verbal Narcanning. And, you know, everyone, because people who use drugs are so responsible for so many reversals in San Francisco, they know what Narcan is. And because of that withdrawal side effect, if they don't need it, they do not want it, right? And they will let you know. And so sometimes I'll be yelling and I'll be doing the sternum rub, and the second I yell the word Narcan, that person snaps up, starts yelling at me, gets on their feet, is like cussing me out as they're walking away, right? It can be a really jarring experience. Because you did everything right and now you're being yelled at. Don't take it personally. What you were checking was, can this person breathe? Can this person respond? And if they're walking away screaming at you, they're alive, they're breathing, you did it, right? Don't take it personally, let that person go. And then you can, you know, I usually call my mom and cry afterwards. And then she tells me I did a good job, and that's what I need to move on with my day. So whatever coping mechanism you need in that moment, I encourage you to utilize it. And so if that person can stay responsive, great. If they cannot stay responsive or don't respond at all, now you're going to Narcan them, right? And so it's very easy. The nasal, device is very, very easy to use. So in the moment, you're going to peel this foil back. You're going to take the device out, and you're going to stick the device all the way up one nostril. Don't overthink it. Remember, this is a very simple process. You do want to get it all the way up there. You don't need to plug a nostril. You don't need to switch nostrils, all the way up. And then you're going to so you're going to click it like this. This is expired, so it's fine. It's in my mouth. So it goes all the way up, and they don't have to be breathing for it to work, right? It gets absorbed through the sinuses. It gets absorbed through those mucous membranes. So that's why you want to get it all the way up the nostril. It takes Narcan about 2 to 3 minutes to start working. Longest 2 to 3 minutes of your life when someone's not breathing in front of you. And so in this time, the one thing they're not getting is oxygen. And so we want to make sure that we're getting oxygen into them. COVID has really impeded our ability to rescue breathe at the scene. And so I really encourage people to make the decisions that they feel safest with. I'm going to teach you everything so that you know. But again, mouth to mouth rescue breathing is like our recommended step here. And during COVID, that can put you at more risk or at harm's way. So just be mindful of that. When we're providing rescue breathing, we're tipping that head back, we're pinching that nose, we're opening that person's mouth, putting your mouth over theirs to form a seal. One breath every 5 seconds, right? You'll see that chest rise, that means it's working. It's really helpful if you can keep time because that keeps you grounded. So like I usually hit the timer on my phone so that I kind of understand, because if anybody's ever been in a crisis, you know that time either speeds up wildly or just completely stops and you just lose track of it. Because the key is that the more Narcan you give someone, the sicker they're going to be when they wake up. You will never have enough Narcan to cause harm to this person. So don't trip. Just try to give one dose every 2 minutes until they start to respond. But we got to give it time to work. It doesn't work any faster if you just slam them with a bunch of doses. And the thing to remember is that, because of criminalization, because of stigma, people get punitively Narcaned all the time, right? So just being mindful of how much you're giving them while also staying steady and staying with them. So one dose of Narcan every 2 minutes. Slowly, what will start to happen as those opioids are pulled off the receptor, they will slowly start to breathe again. The first thing that usually happens is the chest muscles contract, right? They pull in that snore gurgle. Gradually it levels out and then they start to respond. Like I said, they don't know that they've overdosed, right? And I'm sure people have heard stories about, that's a good question. Punitively Narcan means that they are administered Narcan as a punishment and as a way to say drugs are bad, you have drugs in your system, I'm going to administer this medication to put you into withdrawals so that you're not on drugs anymore, right? So causing people more harm because you don't agree with what they've decided to do with their bodies, right? This happens at the hands of police. This happens at the hands of EMS. This happens in hospitals. And so that also accounts for a lot of people's trauma around being Narcaned, why people might have like a visceral reaction to you if you say, do you need Narcan? That kind of thing. It's important to understand that context. Again, so you don't take it personally. That's a whole lot of trauma and it's not about you. And so what we want to do is, so as this person's waking up, right, they have no idea what just happened. I'm sure people have heard stories of like, you have to be careful when you Narcan someone because they'll wake up pissed and they'll wake up swinging. That is also stigma, right? It claims that our people are violent, like inherently violent. And like the only reason they would be mad is because you took their high away. But what you're also doing, right, is putting them in pain and traumatizing them. It's very traumatizing to wake up very disoriented, surrounded by a bunch of terrified strangers, some of whom could be in uniform, all screaming at you, and you're in withdrawals, right? So as someone's waking up, we just want to give them a little bit of space and gently let them know what just happened. So I usually, once I get a response, I'm like backing up and I'm saying, hey, my friend, my name's Kristen. You overdosed, you weren't breathing. We tried to wake you up. I'm so sorry. We had to give you some Narcan. I know that you don't feel good. Sit up when you're ready. I've got you. Acknowledging people's pain goes a very long way in de-escalating them. So we really encourage people to really acknowledge that they those people do not feel good and probably do not want to engage. But other than that, as they start waking up, just be gentle with them and gentle with yourself. You know, if you called 911, so we always say if it's an opioid overdose, you don't necessarily, and you have Narcan and the person starts to respond, you don't typically need to call 911. Narcan stays bound to those opioid receptors for about 90 minutes. But after about the first 20 to 30 minutes, it slowly wears off. People start to feel a little better. And then usually after 90 minutes, the overdose window has closed and they're fine. Best practice is to hang out with that person for about 2 hours to make sure that they don't go back into the overdose. But again, if that person gets up and is walking away and is able to move around, they're fine. And you can let them go. You don't need to keep them there. Transports to the hospital are not necessary if the person is awake and responsive. And if they're over 18, they can deny a transport. If you are going to call 911, we recommend calling after you administer the first dose, so that it gives the Narcan time to start working while you're on the phone. But other than that, that's pretty much it. And so that was a lot of information. And so if I'll answer that question, Andre. That's a great question. All that information falls out of your head in the moment, right? All you have to remember is if this person is not breathing and not responsive and you suspect an opioid overdose, first thing we're going to do, try to wake them up, give them a hard sternum rub for that pain, verbally warn them, if you don't wake up, I'm going to Narcan you. If they cannot stay responsive or do not respond at all, you're going to take the nasal device, administer 1 dose all the way up the nostril, 1 dose every 2 minutes until they start to respond. And then be gentle with them on the wake up and be gentle with yourself. Rescue breathing is really important, but we also recognize that in a time of COVID, people have to make the decisions they need to keep themselves safe. That is, we train all, 30,000 of those people that got trained on how to use Narcan are reversing overdoses every day with less than about 3 or 4 minutes of information. So don't overthink it, and I promise you'll be fine. And I caught a question about what if there are other drugs in the person's system at the time of an opioid overdose. So other drugs cause different symptoms with their overdoses. Opioids it's really telltale. So if they have other drugs in their system and also overdose on an opioid, the Narcan will get them breathing again. So Narcan will work regardless of what other drugs are in the system, but they will wake up still experiencing the effects of the other drugs, and they'll be in withdrawal from the Narcan. So it's important to know that, just to give them some space. But no matter what, like a person could have a billion other drugs in their system, and if the reason they are not breathing is because if the reason they're not breathing is because of an opioid, the Narcan will work. And that's it. Did I miss any questions in the chat? It's hard to keep up. Oh, and if you were listening to this and you're like, I should carry my own Narcan kit, we really encourage folks not to, because all of our syringe access programs distribute Narcan directly to our communities most in need. We really encourage people who would not normally engage with those programs to not go there for Narcan. We don't want to take those resources away from people who need them most. But thanks to our friends at the city's pharmacy, the CBHS pharmacy at 1380 Howard, the pharmacists there are incredible. They will give you a very brief training, and then you get a free nasal kit. So the big pitch that I always make when it comes to Narcan in San Francisco is do not put any single one of your hard-earned cents towards Narcan. You insult the Dope Project if you do that. It is free here, and it is bountiful. So please, please, please take advantage of it. And every kit that we give out, whether it's injectable at the sites or the nasal at the pharmacy, comes with 2 doses. And I see Narcan is not sensitive to light. It's a very sturdy drug. And they, so as long as it's not in very extreme heat and very, very extreme cold, it's fine. It also is good for 27 years after the stamped expiration date. Don't ever believe the FDA about anything. So even if you have an expired kit, it will still work. Whew. Any other questions? I'm just going through the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, that's a good question. So someone asked, how long should we remain with them after they wake up from being administered Narcan, and how can we ensure their safety? So I think this is always like an interesting kind of thing, is that best practice, right? So Narcan stays bound to those receptors for about 90 minutes. But, you know, people start to feel better and are okay after about 20 to 30. Best practice is to hang out with them for about 2 hours to make sure they don't go back into the overdose. I think that's a feasible thing if it's like me and my very good friend and we're hanging out in a room together. But if it's, you know, someone who's outside, a stranger to you, you know, most likely they're not going to want to hang out with you for 2 hours after like they just experienced this very traumatizing medical emergency. And so it is okay to let them go. And so I would encourage people to let people make the decisions they need to make on scene, and to advocate for their autonomy. So if they want to get up and leave, let them get up and leave. They can take care of themselves. And I got the cue from the chat. I don't want to take up any more time. My contact information is available, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and to the Dope Project for providing this invaluable training. Being able to respond to different situations of harm without police is exactly what we need to be doing and experimenting with right now. So I hope everyone found the training useful. I know I certainly did. My name is Yakira Title. I'm a family physician. I organize with Do No Harm, which is an organization dedicated to addressing state violence as a public health crisis, and also with DPH Must Divest, which is a more recently formed group aimed at building a public health care system in San Francisco that does not rely on or act in complicity with law enforcement. So today I have the honor of moderating our discussion on harm reduction and decriminalization. The principles of harm reduction have shaped the work I do and how I see that work. I am continuously learning more about harm reduction and its power as a framework, including from the training we all just got to participate in. So it's truly my pleasure to introduce our panelists, who are all grassroots experts with firsthand experience using harm reduction and resisting criminalization. We have Ms. Ian Callahan from SF Drug Users Union, Cesar Espinosa Perez from RAD Mission Neighbors, Laura Thomas from SF AIDS Foundation, and Felony Castro from Glide and Black and Pink. Each of our panelists has specific expertise in using harm reduction to support criminalized communities, including folks who use substances or who are unhoused, who engage in sex work, or who are living with HIV and AIDS. Each panelist will first present the work they do with their organization and how they use harm reduction. After we hear from each speaker, we'll move into a 20-minute discussion on a few questions we've put together for tonight's event, focusing on harm reduction, COVID, and abolition. After the panel discussion, we'll open it up to some questions, so please be ready to drop them in the chat at that point. Before we get started with the panel, I would just like to remind all of us who are speaking to speak slowly, clearly, and with generous pauses for the sake of our live interpretation. Ms. Ian, would you mind starting us off by introducing yourself and the work you do with harm reduction and decriminalization?
Yeah, I have no problem doing that. Is my video thing is not working? Do you want me to have video? If not, no problem.
I think you're good either way.
Sure. Oh, there it is. Hey. Okay, perfect. So my name is Miss Ian. I work at a place called the San Francisco Drug Users Union. And I have a friend, and I'll introduce him in one moment. But I guess we're sort of we're a needle exchange and like a Narcan training and distribution center. So the thing that you just learned about from Kristen, we have a lot of Narcan on site, and we train a lot of people how to use it. And our staff is outside. We're based in the Tenderloin. We have reversed a lot of overdoses ourselves out in the streets. And usually that looks like someone running in our building and asking for Narcan because someone is overdosing outside. Let me think. I guess we're sort of a mom and pop version of a needle exchange. We do very basic harm reduction work and interventions with people who use drugs. So also the Narcan that we give out is primarily for people who use drugs in the area. But sometimes people travel from Modesto, Pacifica, areas outside of San Francisco that don't have access to clean supplies and naloxone. I would say that we're 100% drug user run. So it was our intention to not be an idealist version of a nonprofit that winds up in poorer neighborhoods, bringing in kind of people from the outside, saving people on the inside, which is a model that makes me feel kind of gross, and we can go all into that maybe. But so everybody that works here is either an active drug user or a former drug user, and a lot of us have been formerly incarcerated, either in jail or prison, and a lot of times because of something involving drugs. So, which has been an amazing adventure. I think that we, as a group, wanted to show that drugs can be a problem in people's lives for sure, but a lot of times it's not the main problem. A lot of times there is a lot of other issues, events, mental health obstacles that prevent people from functioning on a level that society agrees with. So a lot of people choose drugs as a form to cope. And when they choose drugs as a form to cope, because they're easily accessible and cheaper than other things, they wind up accidentally putting a lot of obstacles in their way from ever moving forward, if that makes sense. So once you go to jail for drugs, that's on your record. It is hard to get housing. It is hard to get another job. And so we wanted to show specifically that when you are a drug user, you can also be functional and responsible and accountable for bad behavior. I want to say also that, how I do this, I got a couple of things, because you can go in like a million directions with this topic. So what I want to do is, they gave me some leading questions, and some was, if you want to, you can check out a little bit about us, because we were just in the Chronicle, the San Francisco Chronicle, and I can't remember what the article was called, but it's like, if COVID-19 isn't, isn't causing all of the deaths of homeless people, then what is? Something like that. And I would say another cool thing about us is that just our staff reversed over 300 overdoses in the area last year, which was cool. And a thing that is interesting about people who use drugs is that it intersects with every single identity. So there are a bunch of different politics that wind up occurring inside our organization that are the issues that a lot of organizations deal with separately. But because we have all of these different identities in one place, it's interesting to watch how people can interact and work together despite being so different. And that being said, I would love to introduce my friend Mohammed, who works with me here and is one of my best friends in this work. And he's gonna tell you a little bit about himself, and then we'll stop talking, we promise.
Hi, my name is Mohammed. And first of all, I would like to say, let us give each other a hand and ourselves for being able to be here during this time of this epidemic. I work here at the Drug Users Union, and it's very interesting because I find that addiction is not prejudice. It does not have a favor. It's just what it is, addiction. It comes in all different forms, shapes, and sizes. But I once read a book, and I think that everybody should read this book because it is kind of the Bible to addiction. And it's called The Science of Addiction. And it also tells you why each person that has an addiction, why certain things happen to them, like mental, physically, emotionally, whatever your situation may be. But anyway, and it also has no preference over a religion or whatever you might want it to be. I came to the Drug Users Union about 3.5 years ago, and Miss Ian and Holly were here, and I went to prison. I was expedited from California to Minnesota, and my job was saved. And during that time, I experienced a lot. Before I came back to California, I learned about how to treat people with kindness, you know, because they may have an addiction, but we don't have the right to tell or say what or who a person might be or might not be, because we don't have that choice to make that judgment call on that individual. But what we can do is help and provide the necessary services that's needed. There's a lot to say.
I know, right?
Yeah,
Where do you go? I'll even, if I elaborate just a little bit, but Robert also, or Muhammad is saying that he came and worked with us for a minute and was doing really good and was profiled by some cops on Market Street as someone who broke into a house like 20 blocks away from where he was at, and didn't like him or his attitude or whatever. Either way, they ran his record, and it turned out that he had some silly warrant in Minnesota because of not signing some document when he had left prison previously. So they put him in county jail, and they held him for a long time before, what's the word? Is it expedite or extradite? I always forget.
Expedite.
They sent him to Minnesota and held him there for, God, was it like half a year?
About half a year.
Yeah, 6 months. It was bull. Can we cuss on this thing? I don't know. Either ways, it was garbage. And we saved his job for him. He was able to come back, and I would say that's one of the reasons, or one of the things that we use as harm reduction.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ian and Mohammed. Incredible work and incredible stories. I want to get to Felony Castro real quick, who has to go soon. So I'll move to Felony Castro to tell us about Glide and Black and Pink. Thank you.
Hello. Sorry, I unexpectedly have to exit the building, but I will say I work for Glide. I'm in the harm reduction department. I've been here about 3 years after 2 decades in the gated community I hated. And so I understand and have a passion for prison abolition. While I was in the end of my prison time, I received training for substance use counseling. And so that's what kind of got me in that. And when I came out and got a job doing that out here in San Francisco and in the East Bay, I seen how limiting it was, and had already been exposed to harm reduction in a different way, which is what led me to leave that mode and really embrace harm reduction. And currently I'm in a program that I get to go out in a van all throughout the city and do syringe exchange, Narcan distribution and training, HIV, Hep C testings, chlamydia, syphilis, and gonorrhea testing and screening. And I get to take this van where everybody is at, that isn't around building structures, trying to get away, living outdoors. And a lot of times that's for safety, a lot of times it's circumstance. And my primary job is, as a harm reductionist, has to use that approach with empathy and compassion, and also be aware of people's trauma, is to just normalize whatever it is that's going on in their life, so that way I don't add to any stigma and shame, because a lot of us are walking around with a whole lot and they don't need any more. And I hate to tell everybody that unexpectedly I have to leave this building, so I cannot finish with y'all right now. And this is horrible because these intersections are where I live in my heart, in my mind, and what I want to be doing. So hopefully I'll get another chance at this. I'm really sorry, but.
Thank you so much, Felony, for sharing your work with us.
All right.
So with that, we'll move on to Cesar. Can you tell us a bit about your work with Readmission Neighbors?
Yeah, hi, hello. Hi, I'm Cesar Espinoza Perez. I'm with Readmission Neighbors. I'm a sex worker, activist, and organizer. So I'm just gonna start with introducing what sex work is. So sex work is trading sexual services or labor for money housing, or anything of value. It is a choice out of survival, or because the worker enjoys working in the industry. It has similar risks and benefits as sex. And examples include of sex workers is working in porn, escorting, prostitution, adult webcam modeling, stripping, go-go dancing, etc. So why do people do sex work? So when I started sex work, I was 18, and I did it because I liked dancing, showing off my body, flirting, and making money while having fun. My first year in San Francisco, I traded sex for housing, and then I started trading sex for money. Some people do sex work because they like sex, or they like the emotional high of getting paid for it. Another reason is how fast one can make money, meaning that you don't have to wait. If you're self-employed, you don't have to wait for like a paycheck from an employer. Another reason is just like any other job, it's to support your family or to pay off debt. Others do it for sexual liberation, or to help clients meet their biological needs, or healing, or to explore their sexuality. So finding a job can be difficult, especially because of racism, homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny, especially during a recession. People tend to take advantage of single mothers, immigrants, Black and brown people, especially employers. Some people do it because other members of their family do it, while others do sex work to save money, to open another business, or to market their existing business. Sex work is not harmful in the absence of criminalization. So why is it criminalized? California outlawed prostitution in 1872 with a law defining every common prostitute as a vagrant. I had to Google this word because I wasn't familiar with it, but it's Google. When the definition that I found was a person without a settled home or a regular work, who wanders from place to place and lives by begging. And to me, this criminalization of homelessness and of asking for help increased chronic homelessness. Our state is still complicit in the war on unhoused people, on sex workers, and on drug users today. So current California law defines prostitution as a misdemeanor punishable by up to 6 months in jail, or up to $1,000 fine. Due to the lack of understanding of this, so part of why it's criminalized, I believe, is due to the lack of understanding of the sex industry and the conflation with human trafficking. And people make harmful assumptions about sex work. So for example, last year we attended a Mission Police meeting to demand that they stop arresting sex workers, and pretty much their immediate response and lie was that all street-based sex workers in the Mission are human trafficking victims, which we know is completely false. But they invited us to meet with Special Victims Unit. I had already met with SVU, and they started the meeting with the benefits of arrest are, and every other attendee at that meeting had the same response, that arrest is not beneficial, but harmful. So sex work is different from human trafficking, although survivors of trafficking do choose to continue sex work for survival or other reasons. Sex workers do experience exploitation by clients, family members, law enforcement, and local and state governments via its criminalization. So the people that support it being criminalized, or in fact they keep trying to further criminalize it. They argue that banning commercial sex helped protect against violence, drug use, and trafficking. However, evidence-based research shows that full decriminalization protects against violence. Amnesty International supports full decriminalization for that reason. So why should it be decriminalized, and what are the harms we're trying to reduce? So the biggest reason that we want decriminalization is to reduce the harm of criminalization. So street-based sex workers have an increased risk of violence due to the exposure, and especially because people know that cops will treat us like criminals. So cops don't know how to provide protection, and many times they do not investigate violence or homicides of sex workers. So I've done sex work for over a decade, and in this time have had my share of bad dates. Clients owe me thousands of dollars. Because of the criminalization, it is hard to get that money that is owed to me. This year, I already had 3 bad dates in which I'm owed $2,000. When prostitution is decriminalized, we will have the same legal right to claim theft of services. This month, a potential client threatened me with a knife, demanded money, and told me not to call the cops because he knows where I live. I gave him the money, and when he started walking towards where I assumed the knife to be, I ran out of the hotel room. When I was outside, I started putting my shoes on, and when I looked back, I saw him walking towards me. I kept running, and then when I was in front of the hotel, I took a photo of the hotel, and at that moment, he walked out of the hotel. I was high on crystal meth, and I felt terrified. I made the mistake of calling 911. When the cops got to me, they searched me for weapons and drugs. When I told the officer that he was hurting my hands, he started squeezing harder. Okay, so I learned the lesson that cops only exist to enforce drug laws. They gave me a citation for possession of a controlled substance. Last year, Senate Bill 233 was passed, and it aimed to give sex workers immunity from arrest when they report violence. Other sex workers who I talked to say that the law was just a piece of paper and that it has not had any impact on protecting us from violence. This is why we need full decriminalization of sex work and drugs, and we need it more urgently than ever now with COVID-19. Rad Mission Neighbors is 100% volunteer run. They they formed 2 years ago, and they formed in response to another neighborhood organization that wanted to speak for the entire mission. They were trying to eradicate sex work and unhoused people from the mission. And so Rad Mission Neighbors is fighting against that eradication of sex work and unhoused people. They organize a monthly laundry day where they, at the Fiesta Laundry, where they provide the coins and the laundry and food for unhoused people and sex workers to come and do their laundry for free. And also in response to COVID-19, they started fundraising and they have an emergency grant program for sex workers. The grants are $100. And we recently just hit $10,000 in emergency grants that have been given out. So they're gonna start meeting every week now on Thursdays. I believe it's still gonna be 6:30 p.m. And we also drafted emergency resolution to get emergency funds from City Hall. None of the supervisors have agreed to that, but Supervisor Bonin has agreed to introduce the resolution and ordinance to stop enforcement of prostitution, loitering, and solicitation by SFPD. So right now we're working on outreach, especially to Black and Brown and trans sex workers, while we draft this decrim resolution. And we need help with organizing, especially because this is a big ask from oppressed people, especially during the 2 pandemics of COVID-19 and racism. How you can support us, if you want to support us with the emergency grant program, our Venmo is at RadMission, RADMISSION. I think my time is up. Thank you
so much, Susan. That was really incredible. I want to move now to our last panelist, a surprise guest who's stepping in, Laura Thomas with the SF AIDS Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Laura.
Sure, thank you. And I'm pinch hitting for Eliza Wheeler, and I hope everyone gets a chance to hear Eliza Wheeler speak at some point, because I'm part of the Eliza Wheeler fan club as well. So my name is Laura Thomas, and I'm the Director of Harm Reduction Policy for the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. I've been at the AIDS Foundation for a little over a year. And before that, I worked for an organization called the Drug Policy Alliance for about 12 years, working to end the war on drugs. So the intersection of harm reduction and decriminalization is very important to me on a personal level, on a professional level, pretty much all the way around. And I've worked on criminal justice reform, marijuana legalization, and particularly harm reduction and public health. So passing those laws, the ones that Kristen referred to that make naloxone access available and legal, make syringe access available and legal. And I'm also a member of San Francisco Taxpayers for Public Safety, and so have been involved in the fight to stop the new jail from being built and closing the current jail. So, you know, I want folks to, you know, to give a round of applause and do a few victory laps on what's happened and been able to happen because of grassroots organizing here in San Francisco in terms of stopping new jails from being built, even new jails by a different name, stopping those from being built, and working to close our existing jails. It's fantastic. You know, here in San Francisco, we have the singular distinction of being the city that passed the first laws criminalizing the consumption of a particular substance. It happened here in the 1870s, targeting Chinese immigrants over the smoking of opium. It made illegal the smoking of opium entirely because it was a practice that was seen as a Chinese cultural practice. It was explicitly done by the Board of Supervisors as an exercise in racial control in the context of incredibly xenophobic, racist, and anti-immigrant sentiment at the time. So that is the history of the war on drugs in San Francisco, and it started here. And the war on drugs has been a system of racial control since it started. You know, marijuana was criminalized because it was something that was used by Mexican day laborers and farm workers. And it then had this idea that it made them violent. You know, the modern stereotype of a stoner is someone who's lazy and unmotivated. The stereotype then was that it made people violent. And we have an entire system that's built on a fear of an imagined fear of violence from people of color. The same thing happened around cocaine, that was seen as enabling African Americans to be superhuman and fight off police bullets, for example. So the intersection of racism and racist narratives, a desire to control Black, Indigenous, and people of color bodies, and the ability to use substances and drugs as a way to do that has been interconnected since the 1800s in this country. And you know, many people believe that there is a reason why some drugs are legal and why some drugs are not legal. That is, there are no reasons that are based in anything related to health, harm, or medical reasons. They are entirely political, economic, and primarily at the base of them, racist. So, you know, we have opioids across the spectrum. You can purchase fentanyl or heroin. You can get a prescription for Dilaudid, for methadone. Those are all opioids, and they all have very similar impacts on the body. What is different, by and large, is who profits from the sale of them, and who is perceived to use them and who is not perceived to use them, right? And Kristen alluded to this in terms of seeing this new opioid crisis as something primarily affecting young middle-class white people versus the old heroin crisis that was affecting people who were not white. So these perceptions, whether they are accurate or not, have a lot to do with with how we respond. And this is one of the reasons why decriminalization is so necessary to undoing the racist underpinnings and the white supremacist underpinnings of the war on drugs, and by extension, the prison industrial complex. Because if we legalized all drugs, that would not in and of itself result in the prisons being emptied, but it is an important step towards abolition. And I fully believe that drug legalization is an important and necessary step towards abolition. It is also an important, to me, an important necessary step to ending the HIV epidemic, ending hepatitis C, ending the drug overdose crisis that Kristen spoke of. Until we end the criminalization of the use of substances, we're not going to be able to address those other things as well. One of the main issues that I work on in particular is supervised consumption services, also called overdose prevention, safe injection facilities. They go by a number of different names, but they are essentially all of them a decriminalization bubble for people who use drugs. And they provide one space where it is legal for people who use drugs to be themselves in their full humanity, and protected from both the potential health harms of their drug use, such as overdose primarily, as well as protecting people from the policing and criminalization harms that come particularly for people who are unhoused and using drugs on the street. So it is a way to create a bubble of drug user liberation and decriminalization. And as each, I'm an abolitionist working in a reform movement, which I know many people find ourselves in these places, but part of my strategy is to chip away at criminalization in order to prove that it can work. So yeah, curious here, which I think means my time is probably wrapping up.
Thank you so much, Laura. And also thank you again to Ms. Ian, Mohammed, Falani, and Caesar. We're going to move now to our discussion questions. We have two sets of discussion questions for the panelists. Panelists can jump in as they feel inspired to do so. The first set of questions focuses on the COVID crisis and shifts and impacts that it's had on harm reduction and decriminalization. The second focuses on harm reduction and abolition. And we'll have a few minutes to talk about each one. So as we know, COVID has drastically shifted the services available and exacerbated already harsh living conditions in the city. How has the pandemic affected or highlighted the need for harm reduction and strengthening decriminalization efforts in San Francisco?
Do you want to call on us individually, or how would you like to?
Well, welcome, unmute yourselves and put on your video as you see fit.
Can you repeat the question?
So as we know, COVID has drastically shifted the services available and exacerbated harsh living conditions in the city. So the question is, how has the pandemic affected or highlighted the need for harm reduction and strengthening decriminalization efforts in San Francisco?
I mean, I'll say, this particular time, it's a time of great harm, but it's also a time of opportunity. And one of the things that we've been seeing happen is the relaxing of a lot of laws and rules and regulations. So, a very straightforward example is bars are allowed to deliver me cocktails to my front door, right? I can order a cocktail from a bar and they can deliver it here. That's not something that's usually available to me. Restrictions around prescribing a substance use treatment like buprenorphine, it can now be done over the phone or via telehealth when it couldn't be done before. The San Francisco Health Department is, delivering alcohol and cannabis to people who are in the isolation and quarantine hotels so that they don't need to leave, and so they can get their needs met. So there are opportunities, and there are things being done right now that we may need to fight to hold on to, but they are proving that they can be done, right? This is proof that it is possible, that we don't need all of these laws and regulations around the substances that people consume. So I think that's an exciting thing that's happening in the midst of all of this.
I just want to say that I strongly believe that the need for harm reduction is the greatest now due to the kind of like the regular pace of the trauma. Like, so much trauma is coming from the pandemic, and also from the loss of income, and also I also got to see when Red Mission Neighbors did a collaboration with St. James Infirmary, where they gave like $1,100 to St. James Infirmary, and their outreach fan, they gave out cash in $100 directly to street-based sex workers. That, you know, we had already known from our peers that sex workers are still working right now, and largely because of the distrust in not just the police, but also the distrust in not thinking that, you know, that the federal government would actually do anything to actually help us. You know, so at first we were thinking that we weren't able to get the unemployment benefits. We figured out that now we're able to get the unemployment benefits, but there's still barriers with for people that maybe don't have computers or they don't have Wi-Fi, or even knowing that, like, or even being up to date on like the political situation of like that they are eligible for unemployment benefits. And with decriminalization, because people are still working, you know, and I'm, maybe I took a couple of breaks, first from the pandemic and then from like the trauma, but, you know, we are, you know, so I caught, I tested positive for COVID, and because the reduction in like homelessness services, I had two peers that are queer sex workers. You know, they were staying with me for emergency housing, and one of them, when I tested positive for COVID, you know, he was in the room with me. So I went to the hotel to quarantine, like to isolate for like 3 weeks. But by then he had already, you know, gotten it from me. And then he moved to a hotel, and that hotel, even though they claimed to be harm reduction based, they didn't seem to know what harm reduction was. And I'll just finish there. All right, thank you.
Got it. Can you hear me? Am I on this thing now? I can't even tell.
We could hear you. Yeah.
You could hear me? Okay, cool. I got like no yeses or no. I was like,
Yep, you're good.
Okay. I think for us, and definitely it's part of it is in that article that came out in the Chronicle, but we have been trying really hard in some regards to get some of the people that we know, some of our friends and some of our participants into some of the shelter-in-place hotels or wherever inside, because although we haven't had any positive COVID-19 cases yet, and we know that there's a lot of risk of people carrying it asymptomatically, that we do know a lot of people who will be devastated or like, I mean, I don't want to be super morbid, but who very well could die if they get COVID-19. So we really wanted to get certain people inside before COVID-19 really touched the Tenderloin or the South of Market area. And we have been able to do that with some people. And the article focused on one of our friends here at the Drug Users Union, but one of the risks is that you are not allowed to have guests in those rooms. So if you are a drug user, especially if you are using heavy opiate-based drugs like fentanyl or heroin, that if you overdose, there is no one else there to provide Narcan. for you. So so if you overdose, it's more likely to be fatal. And so that's what happened to somebody that we knew, unfortunately. And but it is happening a lot, I hear. It is. I don't have any numbers on that. Maybe someone else on the panel can let us know. But that's definitely a thing that has been very tragic in regards to our work. And another one, just a general one, is that it's changed a little bit, but right at the beginning, a lot of people's, I'll say like the informal economy of this area was impacted hugely, like people busking or playing music outside, or just panhandling, asking for money, or even little things like selling little items outside, or just like petty thefts from the mall, like stealing clothing or supplies from a Safeway and selling them secondhand, right? All these little things that people do to make money, it just ended. It just all of a sudden was gone. So like nobody's outside to bust you. You can't play music to anyone. You can't ask anybody outside for money. And a lot of times cops were going around and either giving people tickets or just making people leave if there were more than 2 or 3 people standing together. All of the stores at the mall near downtown, the Westfield Mall, were closed. Everything closed, so no one's stealing anything from any of those stores, which maybe some people think is good, but definitely people here thought was super bad. Yeah, so they're like all the pawn shops also closed for a while. So everyone was affected all of a sudden really quickly by all of the informal income that they had ended. There was some money, anybody was getting any money regularly from a job or from SSI or SSDI or general assistance, that kept going, but it's not as much. It doesn't support everything that you need. And even in another sense of like groups, a lot of people's only social life is through certain groups that they go to every week. And it could be a drug user group. It could be a 12-step group. It could be even things that were like trans, just different trans lifestyle groups, or people living with AIDS groups. All those groups ended. And some of them moved to online through Zoom, but as we know, lots of us don't have access to the internet 24/7 or even a computer. So, and the library is closed, so you can't go there and use their computers either. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of people, especially in the Tenderloin and Soma, who don't have any money, who have a lot of times a habit of substances to support. So a lot of them are very dope sick, and they are, I guess everything turned up a notch, a few notches, let's say. So it was, you could feel it. It was really tense in the air. There was a lot of fighting. A lot of people just like, I don't know, it just got really aggressive just because change, I think a lot of times for people is really hard, especially when you're locked into like a routine, and everybody's lifestyle changed really quick. And so, yeah, it was hard. I would say that first month was really hard. I didn't even realize that I wasn't spending a lot of time doing my regular work stuff at all. I was like, every day I was just de-escalating fights like all day, and I was just exhausted at the end of the day, just not even thinking about that. I didn't even do any regular work. I just been standing in between 2 different people all day, getting them not to like punch each other. And so, yeah, I would say like harm reduction has served like a really cool space, just from remaining open, but also remaining sort of like a human contact for some people. It's like the only contact they're getting. So yeah, it's been super important, like really important for people's mental health, and not just public health things that they need that they can't usually access.
Great, thank you for those really
Mhm.
answers, kind of getting at a bunch of different aspects of how COVID has shifted the landscape. The second set of questions ties into how we can center harm reduction in abolitionist framework and project. So I'll just read them. How can we strengthen harm reduction and decriminalization efforts as a central part of the struggle to abolish jailing and policing in the city? What can members of our communities do to support this work? And what lessons does harm reduction teach us in providing better care for one another in our communities?
I mean, you know, at the core of it, harm reduction is about giving people who use drugs the tools that they need to take care of themselves and their communities. I think Kristen explained it really well. And, you know, that is what is so necessary in this time, in all times, in giving communities the tools to address harms and potential harms, whether that's through restorative justice practices or overdose reversal. They're all part of the same thing. How do we eliminate the criminal justice system by eliminating any role for it in what in how people interact or what communities do? I think that, you know, for me, harm reduction and decrim is about preventing people from ever ending up in contact with the criminal justice system to begin with, right? If drug use is decriminalized, if that's not something that police can harass you know, young people about, it's not something that gives them a cause to arrest people don't end up with records that then get added to over time. You know, we're then able to keep that many more people out of cages. And so the more things that we can decriminalize, the things that are human behavior that are not causing harm to anyone else, I think, you know, drug use and sex work are sort of the you know, primary examples of that. The more we can decriminalize those things, the more we can just eliminate the reach of the police and the reach of the prison industrial complex. So, you know, for me, it's very clear that decriminalization of drug use and sex work needs to happen in order for us to reduce the use of prisons and policing.
I just wanted to say, at least from the organizing that we're doing, some of the things that I didn't realize because I'm pretty new at organizing, that sometimes that work, how hard that work can be, and sometimes like even though I've had some like theoretical training in like at City College and with like TNDC, when we try to center Black and brown sex workers and trans sex workers, we had to be kind of at least especially with sex workers, understanding that their time, you know, that they make there's this opportunity cost of like you know, you make more money doing sex work than you do with organizing, especially if you're doing it for free, as we're doing it as volunteers. And so because we're doing it for free, we have to kind of be aware of that there's so much to learn, especially if we're doing it on the job in a sense, that we kind of have to do at a pace that we know that there's a great level of urgency right now because of COVID, but we also have to be careful to not burn out the organizers, not burn out Black and brown people in doing this, and also maybe having more trainings in community organizing to really just kind of like help us refresh some of the theoretical stuff that we may have learned, or maybe people have never even like heard of like what community organizing is. and also training in anti-Blackness, training in like understanding our own privileges, and even just maybe even having more like events like this one where we get to where maybe someday we'll get to like where it's not like such a introductory course and introductory discussion into sex work, but can be more advanced into like the organizing for sex work. And I think that's probably all I wanted to say.
If I was to say one thing, just when I think about all those things, I think we here at the Drug Users Union, what we really wanted to do was create jobs for people and set them up in a way that people could succeed. I think a lot of times, especially when I've seen other, I mean, I don't want to call it any needle exchanges, but like there's a lot of harm reduction jobs that are supposed to exist for people who use drugs. And what we do accidentally is we invite people in who aren't, who do not have the same education, the same background, the same, I don't know, communication style. And we say, here you go, look, we got you, there's a job, here's your opportunity. And then we fire people immediately because they don't act like how we want them to act, right? And that's unfair. And it reinforces this idea, the same thing that prison does and sometimes public schools do for people who use drugs or who eventually use drugs, that you're worthless, that you can't do those things, that you'll always be a failure. And so we developed a system here to hire people and I guess like so people could make mistakes, learn from the mistakes and not be punished for making the mistakes, and be given enough space to learn about themselves, about what their triggers are, about what mental health things that they might have problems with that they haven't even noticed. So like communication is really transparent. The hierarchies are really transparent. We want to make people believe that they can actually access all of the jobs in our organization, that it is possible, and that, you know, like if people are coming in and they're not immediately politically correct about certain things, that we aren't shunning people away for not understanding that language, but we allow for people to learn that language and understand how the way that they phrase certain things can hurt people. Because it can be really frustrating for someone who doesn't know that language to be yelled at or screamed at or punished for something that they didn't know, you know, makes people feel stupid or targeted. So yeah, I think when I think of those words like decriminalization and all those things, like we pull our employees from demographics and I don't know, lifestyles and stories that have a really hard time getting jobs, and we let them make as many mistakes as possible and know that they have a full community support behind them. And when they have that, when they feel that, people start making better and healthier choices for themselves and figure out how to live a lifestyle that they want, and not just, continuing with the belief that they are victims of a system and they'll never get out of it. You know, that it's an empowerment tool, I guess. But that's what I think of, just to empower people to make their own decisions, to do what they want to do with their life. So I'm not telling them what to do, and but neither are cops, you know what I mean?
Thank you. So we've had so much amazing insight, and we're hoping to get to a question and answer session, and there have been some amazing questions put into the chat. We'll start with one, and then the organizers of this event will be following up by email and helping facilitate answers to all of the really rich questions that have been posed. So the first question is, what are different ways we can transition the harmful language within our own families in order to reduce or remove the stigma they have towards those who are impacted by the usage of substances?
Yeah, and I put a resource in that's got some good suggestions. It's sort of intended for audience of journalists, but it looks at some of the myths and stereotypes around drug use and gives alternative takes on it. So it's at least worth looking at as a kind of a background um, source of information around that. I think, as with everything else, whether it's around, gender identity or mental health issues, the language that we use can, as what Miss Ian was just saying, it can really harm people and be hurtful. And it's like, it's a continuing education for me on language and how things that I'm saying could be said better and more respectfully. So I appreciate people sort of taking the time to think through it. The basic principles of person first are always good, whether it's about, a person who's unhoused or a person with mental illness or a person who uses drugs, instead of saying an addict or using other language that conflates the individual and their humanity with their condition.
I think the most important thing is education and the future of those that are the next generation coming. We have to take this seriously, because if we don't, we have generations that'll be wiped out.
Just one thing I wanted to say is I think just personally one thing that I think is helpful would be kind of also destigmatizing like mental health or seeking out like support for mental health, especially right now with the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, um, because I think when I have sometimes I like to be very open about my life, but sometimes I feel like when I start to share I've shared so much about my life with my mom, but I think she's kind of at a point where she's kind of like doesn't want to know more because it's like maybe she's in some ways she's not maybe equipped or ready to handle more trauma in her life. But that kind of maybe we'll just take that conversation of like what is resilience and like how are our parents, our family members supporting their own mental health right now. So maybe having that bigger question. But I think sometimes when I bring up mental health, I think they get kind of defensive. Yeah, but so I guess de-escalation or like conflict resolution helps.
Yeah, so many tools and really amazing perspectives that everyone has brought into each aspect of this conversation. We are at time, so I'm going to pass it over to our host, Juana, to close things up.
Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. Your work on the front lines in our communities is so valuable to our collective understanding about decriminalization and what abolition looks like in practice. And I appreciate all of the knowledge around community-led solutions and interventions that promote harm reduction with a culture of care and not harm. And tonight we examined a lot, but all of it was centered around how decriminalization is a core component of abolition and our local work to define and create true safety and health. And if you want to find organizations in the city that provide harm reduction services and supplies, you can check out the Reentry Resource Guide on the No New SF Jail Coalition website. We'll drop the link in the chat for you. And if you're wanting more ways to support this work, to get involved, to learn more, we definitely, again, invite you to check out the Reentry Resource Guide on our website. You can also join the No New SF Jail Coalition by coming to the new member orientation coming up next September 19th at 11 a.m. via Zoom. You can attend the next Abolition in Action event happening in September with the date and topic to be announced soon. And then immediate ways to support the work that we just learned about. There are a number of harm reduction events happening this week and next. Tomorrow, Friday, August 28th from 2 to 4, on the 100 block of Golden Gate Avenue, there's an in-person event with the Dope Project and St. Anthony. There's going to be food, barbecue, a DJ, and harm reduction supplies, and a community altar to honor the loved ones that we've lost. And next Monday, August 31st from 2 to 4, the SF AIDS Foundation event is hosting a panel discussion on the International Overdose Awareness Day. And that's a virtual event that you can register for on Eventbrite, and the link is being dropped in the chat as we speak. And if you have experiences with policing or imprisonment, or just want to get involved and connect with the No New SF Jail Coalition, our media team, or just our work to tell your story, please let us know. And lastly, we have a feedback survey. We would love to hear your feedback and your thoughts and reflections on the event so that we can continue to make each month better. A huge shout out, thank you, and apology to our interpreter and to our ASL kind of like language access community that's helping us. Thanks again for coming, and I hope that everybody has a good night and is able to take this knowledge and share it and spread it, multiply it for the benefit of our people. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a beautiful evening.